he and this other person had agreed that this person would be his helper, and he was just searching using these little tests he'd made up until he found the right person. And apparently that was me. And I didn't ignore him. I didn't think he was just being crazy or had a wild imagination. I actually thought, there must be something in this. He's such an exceptional little boy, and to have searched like this for all this time, it must be worth following up. So I watched him carefully, and we continued to work together. Certainly I helped him to speak, but that was my job. But that was only the beginning of it. So basically, we ended up working together for, 25 years at the time of writing A Mind Beyond Words, and we're still good friends now.
Welcome to the Spiritual Forum, everyone. I'm so glad you're here. I want to remind you that this is a podcast all about hope, inspiration, and awakening. And all my guests have some message of hope, inspiration, and or awakening. I'm very excited about my guest today. I'll introduce her in a minute. But first, I have been so remiss at acknowledging my donors, and I am so sorry. Today, I'm going to acknowledge Stephanie, who donated months ago. But I want to thank you, Stephanie, for donating to the Spiritual Forum podcast, prayer, and retreat ministry. And I'm going to be better at acknowledging my donors going forward. Any little amount really does help. It helps support everything that this podcast does. But also, I just love the idea that somebody feels that they benefit enough from this podcast, this message, that they want to give back, even just a small amount. Large amounts are good too, but whatever it is, I so appreciate all my donations. So thank you, thank you, thank you. Let me introduce you to my guest. Her name is Jes Kerzen. Now, she's worked in a variety of educational settings within the UK, and she's written a spiritual memoir under a pseudonym, and this memoir chronicles her extraordinary psychic and telepathic experiences with an autistic pupil she's known since he was 6 years old. The book is called A Mind Beyond Words, My Decades of Discovery with an Extraordinary Guide. Now, Jes has an amazing story to tell, so I'm not going to go further. I'm going to let her tell her story. Welcome, Jes.
Thank you, Reverend Carol. Thank you for having me. I'm very excited to tell my story.
I'm excited too. I think it's such an important story. I do want to share with our listeners that your story, it's a memoir, but you have chosen to write it under a pseudonym. You have chosen to change all of the names in the book in order to protect the identity, particularly the young man that is the center of the book. And I'll let you explain all of that. And in addition to that, to protect his anonymity, we're going to have your image blurred in this YouTube video. And so I just wanted to explain that to all of our listeners. So it's going to be a little different than in the past. So Jes, can you tell us briefly, your whole book is a memoir of just that portion of your life. And as I said, I think it's a very, very, very important message. And I want to really dig into it. But why don't you just, in your own words, tell us your spiritual story and how you came to be writing this memoir?
Okay. Well, I started out as curious, I think you'd say, rather than spiritually inclined. As you've said, I was a teacher and I loved learning. I think that's why I became a teacher. So I really wanted to find out more. And with children, you learn all the time. There's always something new. You think you know it all, but you never, ever do. And I'd been teaching for many years in all sorts of settings until I found myself in a specialist unit, a specialist class for children with speech and language difficulties. And it was a magnificent job. It was absolutely fantastic. I just fell into it as if by chance, although I do wonder if destiny had a hand in that. And I was in my ideal job. I loved working with these children. Some of them couldn't speak very well. Some of them didn't understand the idea of conversation. There was all sorts of permutations. And it was great until one day a little boy joined the class. He was 6 years old and his name was Asher, or at least I'm calling him Asher in the book. And he was just like the others. He had a diagnosis on the autistic spectrum, which several of the children did have, which meant that social communication was a bit of a struggle for him. He'd also got a problem with the muscles in his mouth, and so his speech was not clear at all. And he was, from the very first moment, clearly a very intelligent little boy. But I'd been teaching him for a few weeks when he told me that he'd been looking for the last 2 or 3 years for the person he clearly remembered making a deal with, and I was that person. And I was somewhat confused, and I said, well, when did we make this deal? And he said, well, before I was born. And that threw me somewhat. I had no idea about things happening before you're born and still being able to remember them. So I said, well, tell me more. I want to understand this. And in his little way, he told me he'd been testing various adults in his life because he had this clear memory that he and this other person had agreed that this person would be his helper. And he was just searching using these little tests he'd made up until he found the right person. And apparently that was me. And I didn't ignore him. I didn't think he was just being crazy or had a wild imagination. I actually thought there must be something in this. He's such an exceptional little boy. And to search like this for all this time, it must be worth following up. So I watched him carefully and we continued to work together. Certainly I helped him to speak, but that was my job. But that was only the beginning of it. So basically, we ended up working together for, 25 years at the time of writing A Mind Beyond Words, and we're still good friends now. He's in his mid-30s. He's a very shy autistic guy as an adult, which is the reason that I've asked you to do this blurring and the reason that I'm not using real names, because obviously there's real human beings involved. And he'd given me permission to write the book, but he said, I don't want to be identified. And so if you can be as invisible as you can, that would be nice. So that's the reason I'm doing that. So yeah, I was drawn to Asher's world, if you like, which was full of psychic gifts that I didn't know existed. He was brilliant at remote viewing, for example. He decided his first language was telepathy and not speech at all. And he taught me telepathy. And in fact, that's how the whole of A Mind Beyond Words was delivered, through him speaking to me telepathically. So that, in a nutshell, is our story.
I just think it's fascinating. First of all, I have to just acknowledge you as a human being, as a soul, to do the work that you did with these children. And it seems like it takes a special talent to see the light, the love, and the beauty in all kinds of people. And that this was what you were really drawn to in the book. It's kind of like you were drawn to this job. You took it on a temporary basis, and then you ended up getting educated so that you could be in it longer term. And what a master of it that you are. That's certainly what I got from your story. And so it's a special thing. And I love meeting people who are really living their purpose. I mean, so many people are struggling about, what am I here for? Why am I on this planet? And you found your place. What were you in your 40s? Where you were 30s, 40s when that happened?
Mid-40s. So, yeah, I was a late bloomer, if you like, but you're absolutely
Well, I mean,
right. You've
it's
nailed it. I did
yeah.
find my purpose, and this is it.
And I think it's such a great message because some people are in their 20s going, "What am my purpose?" Is like just be patient and be open and allow it to come to you because it really did come to you and you said yes. And I got the impression that you were just living a normal life, just a normal life.
Oh,
And
yeah.
then suddenly you're learning all of these psychic things and having a whole different life trajectory than you would have had if you just kind of stayed going along what you're doing.
Well, it wasn't even as simple as that because I still had to carry on living the normal life. But I
And there you go. You
I
got two
was
of them.
leading a double life because if I talked to other people in the teaching environment where I was about what was going on, I think I'd have lost my job. They would not have been impressed. And it was most peculiar because all this was going on under the noses of everybody else. But my family didn't accept it. His family didn't accept it. But he and I knew that the stuff he was downloading, for want of a better word, the ideas that just came into his mind, he just knew without knowing how he knew them.
Yeah.
They were authentic, but it it's not something everybody can take on board. And especially with his diagnosis, people were telling him, well into his teens when he had a official diagnosis done then, there was a doctor just saying, well, these are hallucinations or they're just delusions and it's all part of your condition, your disorder, and try and ignore them. Just, carry on as if they're not there. And I was saying to him, no, don't do that. Just go with it. It's amazing.
Right. And that's why you were the person he was looking for. And what I think is so interesting about this is we know that we only use some small portion of our brain capacity. We know that we're tamped down in some way. We're not living fully to our capacity. And so when we come across somebody who has access to another realm, another dimension, another experience of reality, we tend to marginalize them and say there's something wrong with them. When really maybe there's something wrong with us. That we
Yeah.
can only access a small part and they can access either another part or a larger part. And I do think that most of my listeners would completely understand soul agreements. They would completely understand some of these beyond natural experiences that you had because we know that there is something beyond this physical material reality. So I think I think people will listen to your story with open hearts here.
Oh, that's very good to know. I mean, that's certainly been my experience. I've been sharing the book at book signings and chatting to people. I've been blown away by the number of ordinary people who've just been drawn up to my stand, looked at the book, read the blurb on the back, and said, hey, I work with non-speaking autistics, or I work with people with Down syndrome. I'm sure they're communicating with me. I felt something coming from them, and it's not words, but there's ideas there, and I'm picking them up, and I'm picking up this communication. Do you think I'm doing what you're doing? Okay. Yeah, keep at it. It's happening.
Oh, that's exciting. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's exciting. So I want to get into you're providing us a few stories and examples of what we're talking about. But the reason I think this is so important is because we are not living here on this plane nearly to the level that we can. Now there are certain master teachers that come onto this planet that seem like, oh my gosh, they're magical or something like that. But I really think that we all have so much ability that we are not using, and that I think it's time right now. It just seems like time is right for us to awaken to what is possible for us, and that's why I love your story so much because I'm not like Asher. Asher may have so much more of an opening to certain realms that I don't have, but I do have I do know that I have more than I've experienced. And I think that his story and your story just gives us this example and reminds us, like it reminds our souls of what we can do way beyond what science tells us, way beyond what our parents tell us, way beyond what our culture tells us. And things like telepathic communication, we go, oh, is that woo woo? Or is that the way we're supposed to communicate? Like we're designed for that.
I think we are. And I've
Yeah.
got a couple of reasons for thinking that. One is because, I mean, I'm a mother. I have 3 children of my own. I'm a grandmother as well. And I've watched all these babies before they had any language, but they could communicate to us. And I think it's something that's innate in the human being. And because we've kind of dumped language on top of that, it's like animals have got it, haven't they? Animals, don't need to have grammar and language to be able to communicate with each other. They instinctively pick things up. And I think our
Yes.
telepathic ability has been knocked back in a sense. I'm not suggesting we stop talking, but you know what I'm saying?
I do. Yeah, I think that language, we think that it is some sort of indication of us being an advanced species, but it's kind of clunky. It's clunky. It's clunky to take an idea and then get a pen or tap on a screen and have a word come out and then have to have our brain put all these words together. It's kind of like a mechanical thing versus a spiritual thing. And we know people can communicate remotely, and it just seems like to us that special people can, but not all of us can. But I think all of us can. So why don't you tell us a few stories so people will know what we're talking about at some of your experiences with Asher, either with the remote viewing or the telepathy, or how you communicate and what you learned from him.
Okay, well, let's start with the remote viewing because that came in
Okay.
before he cut off the verbal communication with me. He didn't cut off the verbal communication with me until quite not so long ago, really, because through his teens and his early 20s, we were still talking. But we lived on opposite sides of the country. We both live in the UK, but he's in London and I'm down in the Southwest. Um, we didn't see much of each other anymore. And I watched a video on YouTube of somebody doing remote viewing. And I thought, hey, Asher would absolutely go for this. So told him about it, told him to watch it. And he did. And so we said, okay, we'll have a practice at this. So I would go somewhere. I'm very lucky. I live in a town called Glastonbury, which is a really beautiful spiritual place. We have a ruined abbey from the Middle Ages. We've got a Glastonbury Tor, which is this magical hill. We've got a peace garden just across the road from my house. It's a beautiful place. So I had loads of places I could go to. And each weekend, well, we'd choose one time and I'd say to him, okay, I'm going to leave home now. I'm going to be in this place at whatever time it was, 3 o'clock. And I'll stay there for 15 minutes. I'll just drink in the atmosphere of the place. You see what you can pick up from it. And then I'll take some photos and I'll go back home and we'll compare notes. And so that's what I did. I would just go, say, to this beautiful garden across the road and I'd sit in it and I'd look around at everything that was there. And it's a no phones place. So I couldn't do anything with my phone. I couldn't talk to him. And then when the time was up, I'd take photos of everything around me and I'd come back home. And meanwhile, he would have been viewing it remotely and then sitting down, writing, drawing, doing whatever. And then he, on his phone, would send me a map of the place I'd been in or a drawing of what he saw. And I'm not saying it was 100% spot on, but it's obviously recognizable. And, he'd say, oh, there's a green gate and there's this and there's flower beds here. And, oh, there's this strange thing like a table with lots of holes in it. And there was a strange thing that had loads of spaces for tea lights to be placed in them, and people lit their tea lights as a sort of memory garden. So he'd no idea what it was there for, but he could see this. And yeah, we just carried on doing that in all sorts of places, and he could see where I'd be in a week's time. And he could see that just as clearly as he could see where I was in real time, which blew both of our minds a bit, actually.
And how old was he when this started?
I'd say he was late teens, early 20s, something like that. So he was an
Okay.
adult when he was doing that. Yeah.
Okay. So this is kind of like beginning to realize his capabilities, his capacities, and his access to the realms, as I think he speaks about it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think when he was younger, he would get these downloads, and sometimes he found them quite intrusive and quite frightening, because we'd just be walking along the street. He'd suddenly say, "Oh, I just saw something. I saw a vision of something," or, "Oh, I've got a map of all the atoms in the universe. It's in my head." Yeah, just weird things like that. But he couldn't control it. But by the time he got to early adulthood, he was actually starting to get some control over what he was doing, and he could choose to move out of body and to move from his everyday life to his spiritual life, if you like, to the realms, to this other place. And it made things easier for him in a sense, because at least he had some control over it, and he could, when he was just doing his ordinary day job, he could just focus on that and not be distracted.
I'm looking for, as you were talking, I should have pulled this up. Let me see if I can find this. I shared this with some of my family. It was from the book. Yes, here it is. Okay, let me see if I can read it. Because I thought this is such an interesting explanation of what we are. Okay, I don't know what page this is from, but I think he was giving you some kind of a map, and you asked about it. He goes, "You remember the diagram I gave you?" He said, and you said, "Yes, I still have it somewhere. A grid of circles touching but not overlapping, a very symmetrical, all in rows and columns. A design that allows each unit to hold a space, but it can only maintain its position sovereignty structure when supported by the grid. So the strength is in both the overall configuration and the individual integrity of the single unit. We are at once independent of and utterly dependent on the rest, supporting each other and being supported in equal measure. The way every part builds on and supports and is held up by the rest of the structure means no one part is more important than another." Now, I saw that and I took a picture of it and sent it to my family, because I'm like, this is such a great image of each one of us being sovereign and independent, but completely dependent on the whole. We're not one or the other. And our societies tend to go in one direction or the other, like we're all one and my individual nature doesn't really matter. I'm kind of a blob, or I I am only important unto myself. And here's a great, great way that he explained how both of those are true.
Yeah, absolutely. And the other beautiful thing about that analogy is that he said he'd called it a map of all the atoms in the universe, but he said it doesn't have to be atoms. Those little circles, they could be atoms. They could be cells in a body. They could be
Yep.
people. They could be galaxies. It goes on the same way no matter. They could be universes. It could be anything you like, but that is the way the cosmos holds together, and that's the way we work. And I mean, it's true of the cells in our bodies, isn't it? That's a bit that even
It is.
materialists can often understand, that they're all
Right.
necessary.
Yeah, even materialists.
Even materialists. Yeah, I've got a bit of a down on materialism. I think they've wrecked things a bit.
Well, I think, again, the reason this story is so important is I do think that we're being called to to pull away, to rise above materialism. It's so it's like this heavy gravity that's pulling us down, and it's really hard for so many of us. It's hard for me. I have a lot of connections to the material world that I struggle with letting go of. I completely get that while I'm on my spiritual path. But I do think that materialism is ultimately, ultimately we're going towards AI and all of this complete technology. But ultimately, if we go that direction, we'll be cutting ourselves off from the realms that Asher has experienced, and which I think really is more of our birthright.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think, and for centuries and centuries, people had that mystical grasp of the bigger picture, if you like. But that's why I find materialism limiting, because the concept that we are just these mechanical things that, are born because it's a biological process, live for however many years, and then cease to exist. I mean, that has not been humanity's story for so long, and it's just
Right.
come in a few centuries, hasn't it? I think it needs to just, take its leave now and realize that, no, we need to get back.
To run its course. I think the thing about materialism, though, is I do think that if we reduce ourselves to machines, if we reduce ourselves to mechanical or biological processes, then I think we lose our meaning. And I think that we lose our purpose. And I think we become much lower expressions of ourselves. And I think we're much more easily controlled. And I think that those entities in the world that want to control the world, I think they're afraid of us really awakening up to our potential and who we really are, because we don't need that material reductionist world that they dwell in, where they have power and control. We don't really need that. And that's what Asher's message is, ultimately, I think.
I think so. And to get rid of the fear. Once you're not afraid of
Yes.
dying, once you're not afraid that this is all there is, you've just got this one shot, life becomes more fun, doesn't it? You can just keep on
It's
living.
right, right. Just it's very, very expansive. Yeah, it's really kind of hard to combat that. So, what else would you like to share about your experience with Asher? I know he had a premonition about some sort of economic collapse or financial collapse or something like that, and he's probably had a lot of premonitions. But what is it that you would like my audience to know?
He did have that premonition, and that was when he was quite a young kid. He was only about 13 or 14, I think. But I've asked him about it since, and he said, yeah, I think there will be some sort of collapse. I think things
Mhm.
usually have to fragment before the new life can begin. But he said, I don't know what form that'll take. And he's always very insistent that from where he is getting his information, he said, we do have free choice. Nothing is set in stone, and how it happens and when it happens, it's down to collective consciousness. It's down to humanity to decide, and maybe there's another way around it. But he said he can't really see that there is. But yeah, so what else would I like to share with you about him? I suppose people are fascinated by the telepathy thing, because that is
Mhm.
pretty out there, isn't it? Uh, the reason that came about is because when he was in his 20s, he suddenly, and this is the autism coming through, he suddenly announced to me, just like that, I want to stop. I'm not going to do any more of this. I'm not going to do any psychic stuff. I'm not going to talk about the spiritual stuff. I'm just going to focus on my everyday life. I was, I was gutted, to be honest. I've been, enjoying the ride, if you like. I wanted to learn more, but he was having a tough time. He'd just moved to London. He'd got a job, and he was trying to manage all the sensory overload that goes with autism and coping with commuting to work and so forth. And he just said too complicated. It's like putting on an extra set of clothes and it's heavy and it's uncomfortable. And I just want to take it all off and carry on with this ordinary life. So we went about 4 years like that. He was having less and less to do with me, to the point that by the end of that time, all I was getting was a message on my phone, just a single word to tell me he was okay once a week. And that was about all the communication I got. And something inside me was saying, this isn't the end of the story. This is not the end. There's more to come. So I was guided to sit down one day and to say, in my mind, Asher, I need to get in touch with you again. We need to be in contact because we've got more work to do. There's more to be said. And as I sat there, I got a message that came to me that said, feel into my heart. And I thought, well, I don't know if this is Asher or this is my imagination or what, but I started to feel as deeply as I could into Asher's heart. And I saw this picture of what was like a medieval monk cell. That's what it looked like, this little stone building, stone room with a high up window, just a small window up at the top of it. And there was a desk there. And on the desk, there was one of the fashioned pens, the dip pens that you have to keep dipping into ink to write. And next to it was an ink bottle, and the ink bottle was empty. And I got this overwhelming feeling coming from him saying, I need ink for my pen. And so I thought, okay, I don't quite know what this means, but I'm getting the feeling that you want to communicate this way and that I'm the ink for your pen. So you've got a pen, you've got all the ideas, but you can't write them down because the pen isn't writing anything. You need ink to make it work. And so I said, so you're saying you want me to write down what you're telling me? And he was like, yeah, you finally got it. And it turns out he'd been waiting a long time for me to be confident to not speak to him verbally or text to him, but to start to use my mind and to open my mind to the fact that, yeah, we still had things to say and things to do, but it wasn't going to be through words. It's like what you were saying a little bit earlier about words being clunky. That was just how he felt. He said, they're little, narrow, tiny things. They're just little boxes, and you can't put an idea like divinity or love into those little boxes and expect people to understand the full meaning. So he said, your job is to wordize them. That's how I got it, wordize them. So turn his thought into words, put them down in a book, and then we'd have a mind beyond word.
Did you have to, I mean, I can get that. I know I would kind of be nervous about, can I really do telepathy? What did you have to do or did it just start happening naturally?
We'd always done it to a degree, but it was slightly different. He taught it to me way back when he was a little boy in my class because he couldn't speak then, and he and several of the other children actually had this ability to speak into my mind. So I knew it was possible and I knew that I'd experienced it. But he told me later he'd stopped using that because he wanted to focus on learning to speak like everybody else, because he realized that as a small child, he'd tried to talk to people telepathically and they hadn't been able to understand him. And he couldn't understand why, because he knew what they were thinking, but they didn't know what he was thinking. And it came as quite a shock to him. So he put the telepathy aside. He's got a very pragmatic way of doing things. So it's going to be one or the other. And throughout his childhood, he wanted to focus on the speech, push the telepathy to the side. But once he realized words just weren't enough to express the complex stuff he was getting from the realms, that's when he decided telepathy had to be the way. He could have just told me this, but he wanted me to
But
find it.
he waited for you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and I believe that we all have this innate ability, and it's like anything. I think we just need to probably not learn so much as unlearn.
Yeah.
Unlearn everything, all the layers have been put on us to make us this version of ourselves. To go back to how did we communicate before we had words, but we have the groundedness and we have the maturity of an adult, but can have the open nature that we had when we were, a child. And I think that may be where the sweet spot is for telepathy. But think about how that would be, and if we just communicated instantly like that. And when you see herds, or you see swarms, or you see ants, or
Yeah.
they're all doing something in great order.
Yes.
There's no chaos there. You accidentally kick the top of an anthill off, and they automatically assemble in a way that starts to. You can tell they're communicating in some way, and then they start rebuilding, and they just know where the other is and what their work is to do. And I think they're showing us. I think nature shows us who we really are, and people like Asher are also pointing us towards
Yeah.
that. And good for him and you that you found each other. And I believe the way he writes about it is, let me see if I can find it. He said, um, he talks about you grounding his story. It's almost impossible for one individual to be able to move beyond the physical enough to reach deeply into consciousness while remaining grounded enough to be able to explain it in human terms. I can have the knowledge and awareness as I journey alone, but I need help to bring it, quote, down to earth. As you share our story, he says, others like you will acknowledge the wisdom and knowing they have seen in children or adults they care for or they guide. There are people like me who live in the clouds, quote, but can't function on the ground well enough to tell their own stories. However, they will have that one person they are aligned with who will be able to blend consciousness with them and bring the story back. And that's something that I pulled out of your book. And I think he goes on to say, I think you say there must be countless individuals who've had access to wisdom that could not put them into words. He says, yes, there have been many, and there are many now in our world. We owe it to them to share our story so that we can gain the courage to speak out and form the kind of alliance you and I have made.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's just so important, because I know how I felt when I couldn't share it with anybody else. I just thought everybody is going to think I'm completely mad if I tell them this is happening. And when I did try telling a few people, they did back away. I didn't really want to know. Oh, yeah, you get
Let's
this
go back to having tea.
yeah, fixed smile on the face. So, yeah, I mean, it has been a struggle for me, but I suppose Ash has just pushed me on, pushed me through my doubt. I doubt that I was actually picking up what he was saying, that it wasn't all my imagination, that I wasn't delusional, that this was a real thing. And we just want other people to realize if they're doing it, there could be somebody watching this broadcast, listening to you and I are talking and sort of going, oh, good grief. So that funny thing that I've been doing with my daughter or whatever, it's actually real. There's other people
Right.
doing that. So that's what I hope
Right.
more than
Yeah.
anything.
To help normalize it. And I think I shared with you via email, when we're at this advent, this two roads diverging, and one is very materialistic, very technical, AI, all that. And I think the other is spiritual and the realms that Asher talks about. The, we know that scientists and engineers and all can build. They'll be able to build a robot. They'll be able to match our brains probably pretty quickly if they haven't already. But this part of us,
they
the
can't.
spiritual part of us, they can't. They
No,
can't do that.
you know,
And see, and that's what I think makes us human.
that's my big hope for AI, that sooner or later they're going to realize, actually, we've built into it all the things we thought the human machine could do, but the AI can't do these things. It can't do this. It can't have out-of-body experiences because,
Yeah,
yeah,
it's so interesting, and that's like the breath of life, that's like the other stuff is all the body and the mechanical, biological parts that we were talking about before, but the breath of life that in the Bible it talks about God breathing life into mankind, and whether that's metaphorical or real,
yeah,
there is something that an essence that we have, a soul, a spirit that cannot be replicated,
yeah,
cannot be duplicated. It is what makes us human. And that's what I think is ours right now at this juncture in our world to pursue that path and to start practicing and opening our minds to these other realms and and seeing what's possible.
yeah. I think you put it perfectly. I think that's exactly the way I feel, the way Asha feels. And yeah, so much more expansive and so much more exciting. And that's what we need.
It is, and I hope people are inspired to, go, well, who am I really? What can I do? And I don't know that it's about doing as much as being, what we were created to be. So I have another quote that this is on page 36 that Asher speaks about the light, and I use light a lot in my own ministry, the term. And so I just wanted to share this. Light is total clarity, total brilliance, and focus. It is certainly with no room for doubt. That's why it's so hard to convey in a world where duality is in everything. There is light in all people, but always tinged with some shadow, some uncertainty, some doubt. If light is to expand, it must work its way into places where there is shadow and darkness. Then he goes on to say physical life is temporary, which means there is what we term death, leading to loss and sadness and pain. And we know in your story that Asher experienced that. The body has needs, and the search for fulfillment can become acquisition, greed, conquering, or submission. Life on earth is unpredictable. There are many variables that can cause uncertainties and fears. We test ourselves and try to find ways to put more light in place. That just means that we are thrusting deeper into the shadows. And I think this idea of testing ourselves to try to find ways to put more light in place is what is before us now.
Yeah. Yeah. He summed it up pretty well there. Yes.
He did, but you received it. And again, kudos to you for being able to play in this realm on this 3D plane that we're in while people are kind of, or you're keeping it secret so that people don't look at you cockeyed. I am curious about your family's response to this big aspect of your life where you had this focus on Asher. And, meanwhile, you've got kids and a husband over here. How did you juggle all that?
It was a very difficult balancing act, yes. I mean, it helped in a sense that he was several years younger than my children. So by the time I was really working with him, they'd either flown the nest, the eldest have moved on, and the others didn't really want to hang around with mum at the weekend, whereas he was young enough to want to. So it helped a little bit, but no, there was always a little bit of tension going on, and it was a balancing act. I tried very hard to be his companion, but obviously we didn't live together or anything. He got his own family and he got other things. And so, to give enough time to my family, I hope I got the balancing act right, but who can tell?
It is interesting that if you two made a soul agreement before incarnating this planet, that it wasn't that he would come through as your son.
Yeah, I
That
know.
it isn't it? Yeah, it's interesting.
It's interesting. And oddly, years ago, I think that comes in the book somewhere, I had uh, a reading with channeled guide, and the lady who brought the channeled guide through, the guide was saying that we'd had other lives together, Asher and myself, that we had definitely made this agreement that we were going to work in this life, and that in one of those other lives, we had also acted as teacher and pupil, and that we'd found it worked really well. And so we had decided in spirit that we'd work that way again, which was, well, again, a sort of mind-expanding idea for me. Yeah, I don't think it would have worked if he was my son, because I've got 2 other children, and that would have been awful for them, wouldn't it? If I'd just had this one that I had this really close relationship with, and the other 2 not so much. That wouldn't have worked. But yeah.
Right. Or maybe the whole parental role would also kind of cloud your ability to see
Yeah, I think
to see the
so.
possibility in him. Yeah. It does kind of make sense now that I think about it. Yeah. And it's interesting. There may have also been something involved in the finding each other. That's because you were drawn to the work. You weren't in that work,
Yeah.
and then you were drawn to the work, and and that's where you met him. And so that's also where you fulfilled yourself in terms of having a career.
Well, I've said in the book, the old saying, when the pupil is ready, the teacher will appear. In my case, it was completely the opposite. I was ready because I'd found the right job, and I literally started on the further training that you mentioned earlier to become a specialist teacher in this line of work. And completely unbeknownst to me, that same year, across the other side of the same town, this lady was giving birth to a little boy who would be Ash. So he literally came in right at the moment that I was. And so I had my 6 years of apprenticeship in the job, so I really knew my stuff. But then suddenly he turned up in the classroom. It's all very clever.
Very, very interesting. Yeah, yeah. So now he is in his 30s, you said,
Yeah.
and he is functioning in society, and he has lucrative work
Well, he has a job, and he's
know,
holding it
he has a
down,
job.
which
Okay.
is,
Okay.
I think it's 8 out of 10 autistic people can't find work. In a sense, he's done very well to hold the job down. But from what I can gather, because he doesn't have much contact with me in the physical sense, he just does that job, comes home and decompresses, for want of a better word. So he doesn't have as much of a social life. He stays in during the evenings, weekends. He doesn't go out. He's very shy, very, very introverted. But he told me that he has a certain amount of energy in his light body, and he's put enough into the human body for it to be able to cope, so that he can keep all the rest to visit the realms, to do the interesting stuff, if you like. That's his way of coping.
Yeah. And maybe you can say a little bit more about that in terms of his light body visits the realm. So it's almost like an out-of-body experience.
Yeah. I mean, he says our consciousness is not all in our body, which I'm sure you're fully aware of. We have consciousness, and a small part of it is stuck into this human body. But he said if you imagine the light body as a beam of light, for want of a better term, going right from the depths of the earth right up to infinity, somewhere up there. He said your consciousness can move in or out of the human body. And he's quite interesting on that, because he says when they do these EEG tests, or whatever they're called, where they put all these electrodes and measure brain waves, he said they think when somebody's in unconscious or in a coma or in deep sleep or whatever, there's virtually nothing going on in the brain. In fact, that can be, if you think of near-death experiences and things like that, that can be when consciousness is at its most expanding, because it's not stuck in the body. It's actually got this, infinite area to be exploring. And so he said it isn't. All they're doing when they're measuring your brain waves is measuring how much consciousness is stuck in the brain at that moment. But at other times, your consciousness isn't in the brain, it's elsewhere, and he can take his in and out and decide how much he's going to put in his body and how much he's going to put up there. That's the clever bit about it.
I mean, that's interesting agency to have. I'm going to keep so much here so that my body can function, and the rest is going to be traveling into these realms. It doesn't surprise me. I think we live with a lot of inversions where we're told one thing, but it's just the opposite. And so the scientists are saying there's no brain activity, but that's where consciousness is at its highest level. Do you want to share a little bit about the gamma, alpha, beta, theta waves?
Oh gosh, I don't even know if I can remember them. They're really complicated,
okay,
aren't they?
That's fine. That's fine.
The only sort of real takeaway from that is that the beta, which is the very focused, Earth-centric kind of stuff we do in our everyday lives, where we're just focused on getting from A to B, being at work on time, doing our job, which again is very spiky in terms of brain waves. He said that's okay, but it's cutting off a lot of what's going on in our greater consciousness. It's sort of shutting things down into the body too much. Go into alpha, which is the next level up, then you've got a more balanced. We're still linked to the earth. We're not in some trance or useless in terms of human life, but we've got a connection between the body and spirit, and alpha is joined. And he said most people who are neurodivergent have the theta, which is the one above alpha, above, it's no real physical, but you know what I mean. That level, theta, is their basic state, which is why a lot of people who are neurodivergent seem a bit spacey, seem a bit head in the clouds, as Asha puts it. They find it difficult to focus down on the beta stuff, the things that we're wanting people to do every day. And he could move to the alpha state where we've got the balance between the two. That would actually really benefit humanity.
Yeah, and that's an important message. So I appreciate your sharing some of that.
I think I got it right.
I've got to go back and look at it because I seem to remember there's one band where it's intuition and I was thinking that maybe it is what you're talking about, but that is what we're really not accessing as much in the beta. It's the world we live in. We're go, plan, all this stuff, and that is the world where what neurotypical people are very good. They're fluent. It's our fluent area to be in. And it's just interesting to know that there are other people on the planet who are functioning more primarily in different waves, and that's one of the reasons they access different kinds of information, different kinds of realizations.
And it's also the reason that neurodivergent people find life on Earth so difficult. It's such a strain for them because what to us seems normal and everyday, and it can be overwhelming if you've got sounds that are way too loud and smells that are overpowering and tastes that do your head in. It's all that sort of stuff. So they need to be that bit removed. They need to be out of it a bit to function, but society doesn't really let them do that.
Yeah, and there must be a sense of being kind of trapped, like I'm stuck on this plane with all these people who are dancing to another song. Like I can't dance that song. It's uncomfortable for me, but everybody's comfortable dancing to that song. So how do I ever belong here? It's got to be a very frustrating experience of life.
Yeah, I think that's a brilliant way of putting it,
So would you like to share, I want to close, and so I want to make sure that you have covered what you want to cover. And so if you have something else, Jes, that you want to share, I want to give you the last words.
I I think we've had a really lovely, wide-ranging discussion of it, actually. I think I've
We
covered all the
have.
points, but I don't just,
Okay.
yeah, the book's out now, A Mind Beyond Words. It's available everywhere. And I've got a website, which is www.ashatree, and I expect that'll be in your notes somewhere on there. And
Yes.
that got access to more information about us. I put out a newsletter once a month, and Asha always contributes to that telepathically. So, yeah, that's what we're up to these days.
Great. Okay. And I really appreciate you coming on. I appreciate the story. And you know that I read your book on a screen in a PDF form. It is my least favorite way to read a book. I never received the paperback book. And I love paperback. I love having paper. And I thought, this is so funny, Jess, because I thought, well, I'll just skim your book to get ready for this because I can't stand reading on a screen. And I spent about 5 minutes and realized I'm not going to be able to skim this book. I'm I'm gonna have to read it. And it was captivating. It was captivating, and the
Oh,
story
bless you.
is compelling. And it's also just such an important message, and that's why I wanted to bring you on to kinda elevate the message and provide a platform for the message because I think we're in very, very important times. It's important for us to discern that we're being called to take this spiritual path. We're being called to rise up to our capabilities and who we've been created to be, which is divine and human, and that the AI can't do what we can do.
Oh, yeah, I absolutely agree with you there. And yeah, exciting times.
It is exciting. It is exciting. So please thank Asher for us as well. I know
I
he's got
will.
some anxiety
Yeah.
about this going public, but we really appreciate his wanting to have his story told through you.
Thank you. And thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to share our story, Reverend Carol. I've really enjoyed it.
I have to. I have to. And thank you, listeners, for being with us. And I hope you're inspired by today's story. And I now close the Spiritual Forum.